Joe Knight. He's still on the West Coast?
Yeah, that's still out in Seattle.
Uh-huh. So this is going to be live stream. This is going to be live stream, Mr. Moore? Okay, so you'll have a bigger audience than what you actually see here.
I'm not worried about it, one way or another. Don't worry about those who aren't here. Talk to those who are.
Speaking of something else, different. How's the search coming? Or is it too early?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I've been holding my breath.
Yeah.
It's there's two things that I have. One is, yeah, buses are hard.
As the pastor who, his brother pastor who preached to eulogy, I think, said that Calvin at the beginning wasn't the Calvin that you had. So you need somebody who can grow into don't expect that.
What's going on in those communities? Black folks just moving out of.
I did that. You can read that.
Yeah, you should read it.
Yeah, I know the issue, obviously.
Yeah, I know. But think about one years back and moved out from America.
Yeah.
Gentrifying and they were complaining about the parking on Sunday. They complained about the noise.
Yeah.
That's gonna come.
It is, and even remember, a few years back there was an attempt to rename Harlem something like Soho, one of those kind of things. And then my friend Dawn has Grandma's Place bookstore on 120th. So at the end of the block is the park. Like people complaining about the park having too many loud people there, and playing basketball too late, and playing the music too loud. That's why you can hear me playing. You wanted to play in Harlem.
How are you? There's a convocation.
I'll give you I came last week. That's what
So just tell me something you're saying.
So anyway,
So are you dashing back out here?
Theodore.
All right, my schedule is open because young lady who had a field in his office going out.
And thanks for putting yourself to work.
all right.
You have in mind for him after this is over? Is there time for lunch or something? He said it's up to you. So you guys will have to do this. But he said it's up to you. I mean, it's not like a meeting.
Was that? I'll do whatever you say. Oh, okay. Got it. Got it. Let me just get a pen out of here.
Let's put you right in the middle.
Okay.
And I'll move your phone.
Thank you.
Up to 14%.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. It's getting there.
So, just come up.
Okay.
Okay. I think we're gonna get started.
Okay, no problem.
Straight. Good morning, everybody. Let's see if our microphone is live. Very good. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the Dr. Martin Luther King Malcolm X Black History Month Convocation, one of 4 university convocations for the month of February. My name is Pace McConkey. I'm the director of the Robert M. Bell Center for Civil Rights here on campus. In a nutshell, the Robert M. Bell Center for Civil Rights and Education is established here at Morgan State University for the purpose of identifying and addressing any policy or practice in our nation's schools at any level, elementary, secondary, and higher education. We identify and address any continuing policy or practice that would foster discrimination on the basis of race or perpetuate the inequities of segregation by race. And then through research, teaching, training, and advocacy, we seek the elimination of those racially discriminatory policies and practices and seek to replace them with racially just policies and practices. And it's important to note that because we cannot address inequities in education in isolation from inequities and racial injustices in every other facet of society, then we seek to address racially discriminatory and unjust policies and practices in other facets of society as well, whether it's in voting, political empowerment, the economy, labor, housing, the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, every institution that we interact with on a daily basis. And so that is the purpose of the Robert M. Bell Center. And if you ever have any questions or you're interested in being a part of our programs and our efforts, then you can contact me or Dr. Simone Barrett. Our offices are on the 4th floor of the Earl S. Richardson Library. We thank Dr. Edwin Johnson for his leadership in organizing the University Convocation series. And we're very appreciative of him and other staff at Morgan that have made this convocation possible. And we welcome all of you once again. And we announce also that this convocation is being live streamed, and we welcome those who are participating virtually with us this morning as well. We will begin by inviting Jayla Way to come forward. She will lead us in the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Thank you, Ms. Way. We ask everybody to please stand.
Lift every voice and sing till the harp ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high above listening skies. Let it resound till victory is won. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Simone Barrett, the Research Associate in the Robert M. Bell Center for Civil Rights and Education. On the 10th or March 10th of this year, a new play entitled Symptoma. Symptoma will have its world premiere at the Pier Theater, Canada Street Art Center in Charleston, South Carolina. This new play highlights Sumter Poisetta Clark, who is often referred to as the mother of the Civil Rights Movement, who developed the framework used by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to organize Southern Blacks by using citizenship schools models to teach literacy to people who for generations had been denied the right to vote and have access to equal education opportunities. They have commissioned Dr. Patricia Dockery Williams of Morgan State University to write the play. She was supposed to be here with us today. However, she is ill and she can't be here to speak about the play. However, we would like to congratulate her on this wonderful accomplishment. And I understand that there will be a few people from Morgan going down to South Carolina to see this play later this year. So we hope that sometime maybe they'll bring it to Morgan. Dr. Dockery will bring it to Morgan so we can see it as well. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett, for that significant announcement. And we're sorry that Dr. Patricia Williams Dockery can't be with us today. She was excited to speak with you about the world premiere of her new play about Septima Clark. But if you want more information, she will be happy to engage you. She's in the Office of Academic Affairs, the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, Patricia Williams Dockery. And we wish her a speedy recovery. And I would just say, in addition to what Dr. Barrett has said, that Septima Clark is a perfect example for all of us of those who want to make a tremendous impact as racial justice and social justice activists in whatever circle and sphere we may be in. We can make a difference. And it's appropriate that this play has been commissioned by the Charleston League of Women Voters and the Pure Theater in Charleston, South Carolina, to highlight the life and work of Septima Clark. If you want to have more information also, you can go to puretheater.org to learn more about this play and to purchase tickets and go to Charleston if you want to do that. Hopefully the play will travel and come to Morgan at some time very soon. Thanks again, Dr. Barrett. It's my privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Ted Shaw, as the keynote speaker for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Malcolm X Black History Month Convocation. Theodore M. Shaw is the Julius L. Chambers Distinguished Professor of Law and Director of the University of North Carolina Center for Civil Rights in Chapel Hill. He is a prominent and revered civil rights lawyer, advocate, activist, educator, and scholar, born and raised in Harlem and the Bronx and the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York City. In each of these capacities, Ted has demonstrated considerable expertise in constitutional law, equal protection under law, civil rights, racial justice, social justice, voting rights and political empowerment, fair housing, equal educational opportunity in elementary, secondary, and higher education, affirmative action, civil and criminal justice, capital punishment, and international human rights. His litigation and advocacy experience in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, and more than 26 years with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, LDF, which is the nation's premier civil rights advocacy and litigation public interest law firm. This had him participating in and leading cases in state and federal courts at the trial and appellate levels and before the Supreme Court of the United States. Ted became the 5th Director Counsel and President of LDF, preceded only by the legendary legal titans Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, Julius Chambers, and Elaine Jones, and succeeded by Sherilyn Ifill, and now Janae Nelson, who leads LDF. Ted rightfully stands with these titans of civil rights law, advocacy, activism, and education. He is a pillar of strength in the civil rights community, and I believe he is a perfect example of the great Charles Hamilton Houston's mantra that a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And if that's true of lawyers, it has to be true of every one of us, whatever capacity we carry. So we are honored and fortunate to have Ted here with us today. Let's give him a warm and appreciative, warm Morgan welcome to our campus. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pace. Pace McConkey is right. We are longtime colleagues and friends. We've known each other for more years than I can count now. Actually, to fess up completely, I could count them, but I'm not going to. And he is one of the civil rights lawyers who I have worked alongside of and with over many, many years. Came to a point where I can call him a friend, and I'm proud to do that. And I'm glad he's here at Morgan. I'm glad to be at Morgan for a day. And I want to also lift up a couple of other people who are Morgan folks. I got a message last night from a good friend of mine, and some of you must know him even though he's not here on campus much, but he's an alum of Morgan State. One of my dear friends, Peter Harvey, who has been, well, he's a partner in a big New York law firm, but he was also the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey. We don't have that many black folks who have been attorneys general of states, and he's one of them. So I want to lift up his name. He is so proud of Morgan. He's always a champion of Morgan. Wherever he goes and whatever he does, he talks about Morgan. And then one of my law school classmates is sitting
Over here.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. E.R. Shipp, whom you all know. You have the benefit of her as a member of the faculty here. When I was at law school, it was enough for me to try to get through law school. She got through law school and journalism school and became a great journalist. Pulitzer Prize winner and so much more. And we also were members of the same church, Abyssinian Baptist Church in the city of New York. But she's a dear friend from Conyers, Georgia. If you know anything about Conyers, Georgia, there's a lot of history there. For a ship to come out of Conyers and to do what she's done, well, I'm proud of her, and I'm blessed by her friendship. I also want to lift up the name of Robert Bell. He's someone I met. I can't say I knew him, not well. I knew people who knew him well, but the fact that his name still graces this campus and his legacy lives on is something that I'm very aware of. I want to thank the young lady who led us, or actually she didn't lead us. She sang Let There Be Voice. I had a moment when I thought that we would be joining her, but when I heard her voice, I realized that I couldn't sing with her. You have a gift, and God bless you, and I wish you the best. I've been thinking about this opportunity to share some thoughts, and when Pace asked me to do this, the only thing I asked was what day of the week it was, because I teach. And maybe I'll say a word about that. But I agreed to come. On the way over here this morning, Pace was mentioning that years ago, they had Julius Chambers come and speak here. I don't know how many of you know who Julius Chambers was. Most Americans don't. Even most black folk don't know who Julius Chambers was. I think Pace called his name a few minutes ago when he called the list of directors counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He was the third director counsel. And I'm honored to hold an endowed chair in his name at the University of North Carolina. But part of what I do is lift up Julius's name wherever I go. And I want to do that for a minute, so I want you to bear with me for a moment when I tell you who Julius Chambers was. And I'd love for you to tell me, no, don't bother to do it. We know who Julius Chambers was. But just in case, Julius Chambers was born during the Depression in a small town in North Carolina, segregated North Carolina, of course. His father owned an auto repair shop. He had Julius and two other children. And he wanted to send his children to a better school than the black public school. No slur on those who taught in and ran that school, but of course, they were given very little when it came to the resources to try to do anything that would make racially separate education equal education. It simply wasn't. There was a private African American school for elementary and secondary students. Might have even been a high school. Yeah, that was a high school. Lauren Institute in North Carolina. And he sent the other two children, the older children, to that school. But when it came time for Julius to prepare to go to that school, his father was relying on some work he had done for tuition for Julius. And it turns out that there was a man, a white man, who had a truck. He brought it in for repair work. Julius's father repaired the truck. And when it came time to get paid, the man wouldn't pay him. And he kept going after this man, hounding him to pay him. He wouldn't pay him. Now, if you were a black man back then in North Carolina, segregated North Carolina, you couldn't hound but so much without putting you and yourself and your family at risk. And so his father looked for a lawyer to sue. He couldn't find one. No lawyer would take the case. And there were no black lawyers anywhere nearby. Julius watched his father struggle with his anger and his indignation and humiliation. And his father had to tell him, I can't send you to the academy. You're going to have to go to the public school. And that's what happened with Julius. But Julius decided at that moment that he was going to become a lawyer. Fast forward. When Julius went to college, He went to one of the HBCUs, of course. This is in the 1950s. North Carolina, by the way, has more HBCUs today than any other state. But the one he went to was the North Carolina College for Negroes, as it was called then. Now it's North Carolina Central. Put a pin in that for a minute. Julius did very, very well at North Carolina Central, graduated near the top of his class, and after he graduated from Central, what became Central, he went to the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor to get a graduate degree. I think it was in history. Now, there were very few black folks at that time who went to the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. I'm tempted to stop my talk and find out who these folks are as they come in here looking like something special is happening here. So I'm glad to see you all, and I look forward to finding out about you. Julius graduates with a master's degree in history from the University of Michigan, comes back to North Carolina, and applies to law schools. Remember, he said that he was going to become a lawyer. He applies to two schools. One was the law school that was created at what became North Carolina Central. In the last days of separate but equal, as you all probably know, a lot of these institutions, because they didn't have equal, they began to try to do things to avoid being found in violation of the 14th Amendment, and even compliance with Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision that said racially separate education was, actually Plessy was about railroad cars, but it led to the decisions that said racially separate education was constitutional. It was supposed to be equal, though. And of course, it never was. So he applied to Central for law school, but he also applied to UNC. UNC had only had a handful, if that, of black students who had graduated from the law school at that time. Julius was admitted to UNC Law School, the state flagship institution's law school. The dean felt compelled to tell him after he got there that, Julius, you were the last student admitted, and you had the lowest test scores. Now, why he felt compelled to tell him that, is anyone's guess. And he told him also, Chambers, you're going to do fine here, as long as you don't mess with any white girls. That's what he told Julius. Now, Julius wasn't interested in that. In fact, somewhere around that age, he married a black woman and was happily married for the rest of his life. Julius started out at UNC Law School, and I won't give you all the particulars, but it wasn't easy. They didn't treat him well. And to fast forward, in 1962, though, in spite of all of that, Julius graduated from UNC Law School. As if that wasn't enough of an accomplishment, get this. Julius graduated first in his class. I still tear up when I talk about this. First in his class at UNC Law School, and editor-in-chief of the UNC Law Review. He was the first black editor-in-chief of a law review at a majority white institution, certainly in the South, and one of the first, if not the first, in the country. Think about that. On our way to his funeral, I was traveling with someone I'll say a little bit more about, Elaine Jones, and another lawyer. And we were thinking about that and reflecting on Julius and what he had accomplished. And we said, if Julius was number one in his class in 1962 at UNC, it couldn't have been close. I think if you reflect on that, you understand what we meant. If Julius had never done anything else but been first in his class, he would have been remembered for that. If you are first in your class at a law school and you also are editor-in-chief of Law Review, usually professors are falling over themselves to be your mentor, to help you find a job, to claim you as theirs. Not so with Julius. In spite of being first in his class and editor-in-chief of Law Review, Julius did not get one interview with a law firm in North Carolina or anywhere else in the South. And really, only one anywhere. Got an interview with a law firm in Baltimore, but the person who interviewed him quickly told him, I'm only doing this interview because I'm doing it as a favor of somebody who asked me to do it. You're not going to get hired here. Think about the humiliation that Julius experienced in spite of his excellence. Somebody suggested, because Julius was in magazines and newspapers around the country, that he go up to New York and meet with Thurgood Marshall, who was in his last days at the Legal Defense Fund. And so he did. Thurgood Marshall and his successor, Jack Greenberg, created a fellowship program where lawyers, black lawyers from the South, would come and work at the Legal Defense Fund for a couple of years, trained to be civil rights lawyers, and then they would be sent back home. And the Legal Defense Fund would fund their practice, their startups, would buy their libraries for them, and they would do work as cooperating attorneys for the Legal Defense Fund. There were two internships at the beginning. Julius Chambers and someone you may know of, her name at the time was Marion Wright from South Carolina. Now Marion Wright Edelman, the head of the Children's Defense Fund now and for many years. So Julius goes back down to North Carolina. He started what became the first racially integrated law firm in North Carolina and one of the first racially integrated law firms in the South, if not the first. Filed school desegregation cases, voting rights cases when the Voting Rights Act was passed, employment discrimination cases after Title VII was passed in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, public accommodation cases. He filed cases aimed at transforming the state in which he was born and beyond. One of the greatest lawyers that ever litigated. He litigated cases in the Supreme Court of the United States and the appellate courts and the trial courts, cases that became landmark cases. Eventually, he was on the board of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, but he also became the third director, counsel, and president. Did that for a number of years. I worked with and under Julius at that time. And then he returned to North Carolina and became the chancellor of North Carolina Central University, his alma mater. He reconciled as much as he could with UNC by agreeing to help to start a center, a civil rights center at the law school. I now lead that center. It has not been treated well by the state because North Carolina, as you probably know, is one of the bellies of the beast. Julius died about a dozen years ago now. Most Americans don't know who he was, but surely at a place like Morgan, it's appropriate to lift up his name and for you to know who he was. So I hold an endowed chair in his name at UNC Law School, and I'm proud of that. That's a long-winded description of Julius Chambers. I have been blessed, as Pace has, to do civil rights litigation, to be an advocate for civil rights. And I've been thinking about that a lot because I've spent so much time in courts, mostly federal courts, trial courts, the appellate courts, and in the Supreme Court of the United States. I have been taught to respect and to revere the Supreme Court and the judicial system in the United States. I believed in the promise of Brown versus Board of Education. I believed in the possibility of using law as an instrument for social change, even though that is bending law against its natural inclinations. Law is bent toward maintaining the status quo. And the status quo in this country for much of its existence has been segregation, discrimination. It has perpetuated the legacy of slavery even after slavery was ended in 1865. The law is conservative. It is not an instrument that naturally bends toward change. And yet, civil rights lawyers, first the Legal Defense Fund, then the Lawyers Committee, Pace worked for the Lawyers Committee, and other organizations bent the law against its instincts and achieved some change. I know that when I was deputy director of the Legal Defense Fund, would tell our lawyers, and when I was head of the Legal Defense Fund, I would tell them, if you think, though, because lawyers get, many of us have pretty big egos. We think that we brought about the change in this country when it came to racial justice. I would tell the lawyers, if you think that you are going to lead, if you're going to lead change in your role as a lawyer, you've lost perspective. Because the law is conservative, because it is bent toward maintaining the status quo and it moves slowly, we don't want law to be out front usually. There are some times when it is. But activists have to lead movements. If you think you're going to lead a movement, a social movement in your role as a lawyer, you're sadly mistaken. Those movements are doomed to failure. And I would see sometimes the reaction of the lawyers. I don't want to hear that. We're leading movements. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer. He did not lead the movement for Indian independence as a lawyer, in his role as a lawyer. Many people forget it, but Nelson Mandela was a lawyer. He did not lead or help to lead the movement to end apartheid and for majority rule in his role as a lawyer. Those movements were led by people. It's not that lawyers can't be activists and lead movements, but not in their role as a lawyer. At least that's my humble view. Activists, in many instances, young people. Think about Martin Luther King. I'll say more about him. Martin Luther King was 26 years old when he was chosen to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. 26 years old. Young. But there were younger people than Martin Luther King. I think a lot about a man I knew and loved dearly. And you all know of him also, and maybe you saw him here on campus. John Lewis. John Lewis was 19 years old when he went to Washington, D.C., and he was younger than that when he started his activism and worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. John Lewis was 19 years old when he spoke at the March on Washington. But there were younger people than that. You should know the story of the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama. Children young as 5 and 6 years old poured out of school one day to go and march on the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, against segregation and discrimination. If you don't know that story, I encourage you to find out about it. There was an interview that I loved. I remember seeing of a little boy, about 6 years old. His 2 front teeth were missing. He was at that age when, his grown-up teeth hadn't come in yet. And there was a reporter, a television reporter, who wanted to prove that these kids were being put up to this, that they didn't know what they were doing. They were being used. And he asked this little boy, "Do you even know what you're fighting for?" And the boy, his response was, "Teedum." He couldn't even say freedom because he didn't have his 2 front teeth. But he said freedom as well as he could. I love that story. And I tell it to talk about young people leading the movement. But I also want to lift up, particularly these days, not only young people, but I want to lift up women in particular. I hope you don't mind me saying this, Pace, when you asked me to come, and one of the things you said that you hope I could speak to was the role of women in the civil rights movement. And I said, I'm not qualified to do that. It's not that I can't do it, but I'm not the best person to do it. But I agreed to come anyway. Maybe it was ego, maybe it was something else. But, the civil rights movement, as great a movement as it was a very sexist and even at times misogynist movement. Did great things when it came to fighting for racial justice. Not so great often when it came to fighting for equality for women. I am a deacon, twice deacon at Abyssinian and then at First Baptist in Chapel Hill. My late pastor, or our late pastor, would often say that we're all sinners saved by grace. I have no business being a deacon, but I was called, so I answered. The point I'm making, though, is that the Black Baptist Church and churches in general, black churches and white churches, many of them are the most misogynistic institutions that exist. God bless the pastors who were part of the bedrock of the civil rights movement, the black church, including Martin Luther King. They weren't always the most enlightened people. Could say a lot more about that when it came to gender equality, when it came to equality for women. They weren't always the most enlightened people. So there are so many names of women who were the backbone of the civil rights movement. Most of them you may not know. Some of them you've heard of. The thing about the civil rights movement in this country is that it has often been reduced to one person for the most part, Martin Luther King, who was absolutely one of the greatest Americans of any era. But he was not the whole civil rights movement, not even close. He's reduced to one speech on one day, and in fact, in many respects, to one line in that speech. Well, a couple of lines. I have a dream, the refrain, but the line about his 4 little children living in a country in which they wouldn't be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A powerful line. But there was a part of that speech that could have been called the bounce check speech, if you know the speech. And Martin Luther King was an advocate for racial justice and against militarism and excessive capitalism. He was not beloved by America during his lifetime, certainly not by white America. And the truth be told, Martin Luther King, most people, you would think today, if you heard it, that most white folks or most of America marched with him. They didn't. Relatively few white folks marched with him. And for that matter, most black folks didn't march with Martin Luther King. But that is what the civil rights movement is reduced to these days in many respects. And as part of that, the women who were the backbone of that movement get left out. Women are always the backbone of our institutions. They're the backbone of our families. They're the backbone of our schools, our educational system. And they were the backbone of the civil rights movement. You heard mention of a play about Septima Clark. Most people don't know who Septima Clark was. A great organizer and a woman who taught people about how to struggle. Septima Clark needs to be lifted up. Ella Baker. You ought to know who Ella Baker was. Yes, part of the NAACP, but also one of the people who was present at the creation, at the birth of SNCC. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I think it was on the campus of Shaw University in North Carolina. How many of you know Sweet Honey in the Rock? Can you give me a hand up if you know them? Okay, I know you know them. So I want you to please not only write down the name of Sweet Honey in the Rock, but I want you to go and find their music. Sweet Honey in the Rock came out of the civil rights movement. It's an all-women a cappella group. They were also activists. But they sing a song called Ella's Song, Ella Baker. And it repeats the language and the teaching of Ella Baker. The refrain is, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest." I love this song. I listen to it often. I have for most of my life now. And it's an inspiration. You know, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I come to realize that teaching others to stand up and fight is the only way our struggle survives. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. The older I get, the better I know that the secret of our going on is when the reins are in the hands of the young who dare to run against the strong. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. And at one point she sings, I'm a woman who has a voice and I must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult. I bow to no man's word. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. You know, I encourage you to listen to Sweet Honey in the Rock, not only Ella's song, but so many other songs that they sing. But Ella Baker was a powerful leader of the civil rights movement. Dorothy Cotton, who worked closely with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King wouldn't have been able to do what he did but for Dorothy Cotton and other women. You don't know who she was, look her up. You know, read some of the biographies of Dr. King or read Parting the Waters, that trilogy. Diane Nash, who helped lead the student protest movements in Nashville and in other places. And I could go on and on about the women who were the backbone of the movement, but I want to lift up one person. If you don't know her, know her. Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi. Pick cotton. Became part of the Mississippi movement for the right to vote, among other things, at great personal cost. Fannie Lou Hamer didn't have much formal education. And in fact, if you understand the spirit in which I say this, often Fannie Lou Hamer's verbs and nouns did not rhyme. They didn't match. Some people might think that she was ignorant because of that. But Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the most powerful and eloquent advocates for racial justice in this country, at great personal cost. She and her husband lost their home because they spoke out for the right to vote. She was arrested along with one of her close friends, a woman named Ponder. They were jailed by white authorities in Winona, Mississippi. She was savagely beaten. She suffered damage to her kidneys that lasted for the rest of her life. She was raped in jail. She was sent to Parchman, which is one of the most infamous prisons in this country, state prisons. She suffered damage to her eyesight and other parts of her body, but she was courageous. It wasn't that she was never afraid, but she didn't let fear get in the way. She became one of the primary forces behind the creation of what became known as the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, in which black folks said that the Democratic delegation to the National Democratic Convention in 1964 in Atlantic City was illegitimate. There were no black folks who were part of it. They didn't allow black folks to participate. So they created the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, went to Atlantic City and advocated for racial justice and the political processes and for the right to vote. That's a powerful story. I want you to know it and who she was. You may know one of the things she's famous for saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That was Fannie Lou Hamer. But she was one of the great civil rights advocates. Yes, you can talk about Martin Luther King and Andy Young and Julian Bond and James Bevel and Reverend Shuttlesworth. You can talk about all those folks and should talk about them. But you cannot talk about the civil rights movement without talking about Fannie Lou Hamer and Septima Clark and Diane Nash and Dorothy Cotton and Ella Baker and many, many more. Dorothy Height should have been given voice. She should have been allowed to speak at the Civil Rights March in Washington, D.C. on August 28th of 1963. She wasn't. Dorothy Height, head of an organization of black women, knew every American president from Franklin Delano Roosevelt up through Barack Obama. They didn't allow her to speak. The civil rights movement didn't get everything right. We're not perfect. None of us is perfect. That movement wasn't perfect, as powerful and important as it was. If I had more time, but I fear that pretty soon I'll be standing up here speaking to some empty chairs because I wear out my welcome taking so long. But I would tell you about some of the black women. Some of them were lawyers. The first African-American woman to work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. One of the great lawyers was Constance Baker Motley. Became the first black woman to be a federal judge. Was in the state legislature in New York also. A great lawyer. Won all of the Supreme Court cases she argued except one. She argued a lot of them. The one that she lost had to do with discrimination in jury selection, Swain versus Alabama, and eventually the Supreme Court reversed that and caused or prompted Connie Motley to say that she won every case that she ever argued in the Supreme Court. You should know who Connie Motley was. You should know who the great Elaine Jones is, the fourth director counsel of the Legal Defense Fund. Elaine Jones, the first black woman to graduate from UVA Law School. If you've ever heard her speak, Elaine is a force of nature, powerful, a great lawyer. And I hope that if you haven't heard her, you'll find out who she is. I was privileged to be her associate director counsel, and she's one of my most dear friends. Lonnie Guinier, who died recently at the end of her life, a Harvard Law School professor, struck down by early onset of Alzheimer's. Great voting rights lawyer. I want you to know who she is, a great legal scholar. When you talk about the Legal Defense Fund, and when I talk about them, I point out when Elaine became director counsel, there had never been a woman before her as director counsel. Now, there's been Elaine, but someone who is near and dear to you all, I think, here in Baltimore, Sherilyn Ifill. She's from this area, or grew up from here, settled here, moved here, although started out in New York City. But one of the great civil rights advocates of our time. head of the Legal Defense Fund. And now Janae Nelson, head of the Legal Defense Fund. The Lawyers Committee, where Pace worked. Barbara Unwine, voting rights lawyer, great lawyer. But I don't need to tell you this. If you look at the recent movements, young people, your generation, who are we talking about? BLM. Who started that movement? Black women at the forefront of that movement in its initiation and even today. Tragically, it's the mothers of unarmed black men and women who get shot down by the police that more often than not end up leading the movement for change, the grassroots movement for change. I could go on and on talking about women, backbone of the civil rights movement. I'll lift up one more. As much as I honor and love the legacy of Thurgood Marshall, my hero, my inspiration to become a civil rights lawyer, his mentor, as you heard, was Charles Houston. A lawyer is either a social engineer or parasite on society. Law schools don't teach that. At least most law schools don't teach that. But there was a black woman in the 1940s who wanted to go to law school. I don't know how many of you heard of Pauli Murray. I hope that you have. Pauli Murray was a brilliant legal mind. Pauli Murray wanted to attend UNC for law school. They told her, you can't come here. We don't accept black students. But she also, at some point, applied to Harvard Law School. You can't come here. We don't accept women. She eventually went to Howard Law School thinking she had found a place that would be welcoming and understanding. Howard Law School was small at that time. If you read the history of Brown versus Board of Education and the movement toward that victory, some of the lawyers who were on brief, most of them, were connected to Howard. Great civil rights lawyers and law professors like Leon Ransom, who was a mentor for Pauli Murray. But when she went to see him because she was upset about a meeting that was being held in his home for a legal fraternity that they were starting or they were bringing to Howard Law School, but she wasn't invited. The only woman at the law school, there was one other, I think, who came shortly after that. She couldn't come. And Leon Ransom, a great civil rights lawyer and advocate for racial equality, basically told her that she shouldn't want to come to that meeting. He didn't stand up for her. He responded in a way that was misogynist. Said the civil rights movement had its flaws when it came to issues of equality. Here's the thing about Pauli Murray you should know. Not only was she a black woman at that time, she was one of the most brilliant black women. When she was out of law school, she did some research that produced what at that time was the most brilliant and the greatest, basically a book on fighting legal discrimination, a handbook for doing that. Even Thurgood Marshall recognized her for what she would contribute. But she was also someone who had fluid sexual identity. She was a lesbian. She contemplated becoming trans. She was what Lonnie Guinier talked about, and Kimberly Crenshaw talked about when she talked about the various ways in which people exist and live their lives, right? She was a great lawyer, great woman. She became the first black woman to be a priest in the Episcopal Church. What a life. What a woman. Most people don't know who she was. She should have had even more opportunity within the civil rights movement. I won't keep you much longer. I want to lift up another name and give you, if I can be arrogant enough to do it, an assignment to go find out who she was. Gabrielle McDonald, Gabby McDonald, U.S. Court of Appeals judge on the Fifth Circuit, but also an international jurist. Find out who she was. We could go on and talk about black women, the backbone of the civil rights movement, of our communities, our institutions, and of course, now we have an African-American woman on the Supreme Court of the United States. And maybe I should stop there because I started talking about all the faith that I had in the Supreme Court. I was in the Supreme Court, or at the Supreme Court, a couple of months ago when two cases that are there now involving diversity and affirmative action in higher education were being argued. And it was so powerful to see her and hear her presence, although after those two seats were hijacked a few years ago in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was engineered to become the most conservative Supreme Court during our lifetime, during the lifetimes, I think, of anyone alive now, I kind of decided that my time in and at the Supreme Court had come to an end. I'm happy to see other people there. I'm proud of the fact that we have an African-American woman on the Supreme Court now. And if you heard her questions in oral argument, or if you listen to any more oral arguments, but she's powerful, she's brilliant, and she's bringing it. And she's offsetting the fact that the other African-American on the court has not been an advocate in the way most, he has a right to think any way he wants to think, but his thinking departs from most black folks when it comes to civil rights, civil liberties, the rights of women, etc. And so I'm so proud she's there. But I've come to say to you, I hope some of you go into law. I hope some of you become lawyers. I hope even a few of you may become civil rights lawyers. But you don't have to go into law to work for the betterment of our communities. Be activists in whatever you do. As I said before, it's activists who ultimately bring change about. And so I hope that during the course of your life, your lives, that you work for racial, economic, gender, equality, and other forms of equality. I hope you find your way to do that. I hope you find your voice. I hope you don't leave that to others. It doesn't belong only to lawyers. I think it's important that you understand that the Constitution of this country as imperfect as it is. But whatever it is, it doesn't only belong to lawyers and law professors and teachers, and I hope you work to make it better. So, I think I'll stop there. If I haven't worn out my welcome, if you want pace, if there are questions or thoughts or criticisms, I think maybe we can take him and you tell me, maybe we've gone on too long. I'm still waiting to find out who these young folks are.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shaw, for bringing this history and this perspective and this contemporary challenge to us all to move forward in the cause of racial justice and social justice. If we could all, one more time, give Ted Shaw a hand of appreciation. Very gracious to be here on Morgan's campus today. Now, in just a couple of minutes, we will formally close the convocation and by inviting Ms. Jayla Way to lead us in the alma mater. And we will formally dismiss after that. But Ted has graciously said he'd be willing to take a few questions. And maybe I'll begin by asking, we're grateful for the student leadership that is here with us today, including the royalty. Could one of you just please represent the rest of you and answer Ted Shaw's question about who you are and what you represent? And we have a microphone. Can you do that? Thank you.
Sorry, I had to button my blazer. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? All right. So I am Ediame Akigbe Akoji. I currently serve as the 35th Mr. Morgan State University. Here with me, I have my beautiful royal court, Miss Morgan State University, Mr. Senior, Miss Senior, Mr. Junior, Miss Junior, Mr. Sophomore, Miss Sophomore, and finally, Miss Freshman.
Excellent. Thank you.
So a little bit about us. We are the faces of our school as well as our classes. We just serve the school on a royal court level, attending conferences and such. And, it's just a great opportunity to be here in front of everybody. And thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Can you tell them about the civil rights exhibition that they can go and learn more about?
Dr. Barrett has rightfully invited me to inform you of the historical exhibit that's here at the Student Center that documents the activism of Morgan students in the civil rights movement. I think the exhibit starts in 1947. The activism began before that, but it's a telling story of activism here at Morgan. And if you haven't familiarized yourself with it, please do so. And also, if you have further desire to learn about that and to understand it and to inform yourself so that you can continue the tradition of racial and social justice activism of Morgan students, please talk with Dr. Simone Barrett of the Robert M. Bell Center for Civil Rights and Education. And she will be a great resource for you. So thank you for that. Now, in that regard, as I said, we're going to formally dismiss with the alma mater, but we have time for just a couple of questions, but we don't have a lot of time. So we need to be disciplined in the questions that we ask and allow Mr. Shaw to respond before we formally dismiss with the alma mater. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We have a microphone that we can provide for you. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Shaw. My name is Tyler Harrison. I currently serve as Mr. Junior for the academic school year. I'm also a junior elementary education major. You went to the point of talking about how young the civil rights leaders were back in the day. I noticed that we have certain people who try or attempt to lead our generation in terms of civil rights activism. However, I think that it's kind of hard to lead a generation like us because we're very hard-headed and we don't like to follow anybody. So in terms of people who are trying to lead, i.e. student leaders who are on campus or people who want to go outside of campus and just in the community and world abroad, how can we, it's kind of twofold. Number one, how can we fix our intentions to make sure that we're not just doing civil rights activism for our name or our personal brand? And then also, how can we learn how to follow people who are wanting to do the right thing?
Thank you.
Well, first, I appreciate you saying good morning to me, but I talked so long this afternoon now. I think every generation, younger people share some attributes, and yet they're different in their time. You use the term hard-headed. Yeah, well, we were hard-headed when we were, the age that you are at now. Drove older people crazy, alienated a lot of them. I have a wonderful photograph that I love that was given to me by a photographer who took it in Alabama in 1966. It's a photograph of Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who was known for, along with Charles Hamilton, creating the term, well, they wrote about it, but he created it, or was one of the people, the Black Power. That shook so many people when he began shouting for Black Power. Alienated people who said, we believe in Martin Luther King's leadership and nonviolence. Each generation is going to find its own way. And it's going to take the batons from the older generations if the older generation doesn't pass it, as sometimes older people want to do. They want to hold on too long. But I'm telling you that if you are not given the baton, if it isn't passed on, take it. This is your time. And it's not to say that older people are in the grave before they're in the grave. They still have a lot to offer, we hope. But this is, like it or not, for many people, this is your time. You'll figure out the answers to the questions that you're asking. It's not about figuring out who leads whom. You all will become leaders yourselves. You are leaders already. I'm looking at you and you're sitting here dressed the way you are, obviously doing things. You are young leaders already. And God bless you. So I appreciate your question. But I also know that it's in your hands. If it isn't in your hands already, it's going to be in your hands soon, because in time you will take it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. Junior, please come see me. I have a lot of documentation and information you probably would like to review or whatever about the past two. That'll show you how to get, and the last one was like in 2000, so it wasn't like in 1950. So we had some that was in the early 2000s, so please come and see me in Bell
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jalen Pringle. I'm also an elementary education major, senior here at Morgan. My question is revolving around this kind of very recent rise in what I want to call anti-intellectualism, and these assaults against specifically African American history and just the history of people of color in general and any other marginalized groups. For someone who is going into education, do you have any advice for how, as a future teacher, maybe we could subvert kind of like this attempt to basically erase African American education, and any remarks you might have about this topic in general? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's one of the most important questions, I think, of the moment. And I think we're all clear about what this anti-intellectualism, as you framed it, is about. You know, this is about an attempt to preserve and hold on to white supremacy. You know, February, we call it Black History Month. I was looking in my library at home a couple of days ago at some books by Carter G. Woodson I have. You know, as you know, he's known as the father of what was Negro History Week and now Black History Month. But our engagement on our history has extended way beyond a week, a month. You know, we are demanding that that the history and the contributions of Black Americans to this country and to the world is part of what's taught in schools. And folks are pushing back. Some folks, some people are trying to preserve white supremacy. Shame on them. But it is anti-intellectualism. You know, it's the stuff of, we were talking about this on the way over here, it's the stuff of 1930s Germany, book manning, you know, literal or figuratively burning books or burning ideas, preventing ideas. And, you know, what's going on in this country now is an attempt to push back. Some folks were so unhinged by the election twice of an African American president. And now a Black woman, a multiracial Black woman as vice president, these folks are unhinged. And they fear the changes, demographic and otherwise, in this country. What you are going into and what you want to do in terms of teaching is so important. And we can't let anyone cow us, instill fear in us, frighten and intimidate us in terms of what we make sure our children and all children are taught these days. But this is a tough time. But it requires fight and struggle in this time. In some ways, more than you probably thought when you were young children. You took for granted that there was a Black president. Some of you in a moment didn't know anybody else. You know, but here we are, post-Black presidency. And folks are pushing back. Racism isn't dead in this country. It's very much alive. Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump and others. And, believe me, I'm not saying that nobody in this room, certainly no African American, can be conservative in their philosophy or ideology. But a lot of what's going on is just straight up racism and a dying gasp to hold on to white supremacy. They say that a snake is most dangerous when it's dying. That's what we're seeing in this country. And we have to fight back in every way we know how. For our sakes, but also for the sakes of our children and generations to come. I don't know if that's so good an answer, but it's my answer.
We have one more question. In the interest of time, one more question. Okay. Go ahead.
Is this thing on? Hello, Mr. Shaw. My name is Amani Carey. I'm a college junior, theater arts major, and screenwriting minor. So, based on what you were explaining, I was mesmerized on what's going on in the African American civil rights development, especially for racism and all of that. And the way you were explaining how racism is affecting our lives in throughout the world, especially for young children, young adults trying to achieve their goals, and the way I see it, it's really, it's horrific the way I see it in life, seeing how people are being mistreated just because of the way the way of their color skin, but except for the whites, which is completely idiotic. So I'll wrap it up quickly. So if you see any black young adults or children struggling to achieve their goals and succeed for themselves and for their family, but not being treated fairly because of who they are, what's your message to them?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I'm so conscious of is that we have a tendency to say in this country about a number of things that this is the worst time than ever before. It's not true. We had slavery, legalized slavery in this country. We had legalized segregation. Black folks couldn't do so many things at one time. Restricted in the professions we went into, whether we could go into a profession, where we could live, how we could live, how we could travel. So much has changed, but it's not accurate to say, as some people try to say, that we are in post-racial America. We're not. And there's still so much work to do. Here's what I would say in response to your question. It's something that was a revelation to me as time went on. I believe deeply in hope. Not the hope that's the stuff of kind of blind hope, naive hope, a hope that believes that things will get better because they have to get better. It's inevitable. But more of hope as a choice. Hope is a choice. At least it is with me. It's the conscious embracing of a better way of seeing life in the world, because the alternative, despair, is unacceptable. It's unpalatable. Think about where despair leads, the kind of cynicism and it's the stuff of death. Hope is the stuff of life. So I think that we have to choose hope, even in the face of realities that tell us that there are reasons, good reasons, to despair. But we can't do that. We have to choose hope and then work to make hope a reality. That's my response.
One more. This will be the final question. Thank you. Professor Shaw, Randall Pinkston. I am a former professor of practice in the School of Journalism, currently associate director of the...
I'm sorry, let me just interrupt for a minute. The Randall Pinkston?
Hello, Professorship.
My man.
And by way of, I guess we should say, you Jamal, we both...
yes, I know.
Yes, from Wesleyan. The question goes to the gentleman's question about education, about the effort to wipe out our history. Of course, I'm from Mississippi. We talk about Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and Marion Wright Edelman and everybody else. Thank God for them, and thank God for all of that they did for all of us. My question to you, sir, in a nutshell, if you could, is there any planning, legal stratagem that's in the works to challenge some of these states that are trying, that have already passed laws saying that there are certain things you can't talk about in class? Yeah. You can't talk about race. How are you going to talk about the civil rights movement without talking about race? I don't know. Is there any legal stratagem, in a nutshell, that you could share with this audience that may be in the works with you and your esteemed legal minds?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, Randall, it's good to see you again. It's been a while. My quick answer to that is that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund does, and some other legal groups. I think the Lawyers Committee may be part of it, but I'm not sure. There's litigation pending in and against the state of Florida right now, and against DeSantis on these issues. There's arguments being made that the policies and practices that they are implementing violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, but also violate First Amendment rights. And so I think if you go to the website of the Legal Defense Fund, you can find out more about that litigation. And I hope there's more to come. We've got to fight this in the courts, but we have to fight it politically. We have to fight it, in the streets in every way that we possibly can. So I'm glad you asked that question. This is a singularly important moment.
Thanks for those excellent questions. I know there are many more, but in light of the university hour coming to a conclusion and classes and other obligations soon to be upon us, we'll have to bring the convocation to a close. But we thank you. We thank you for being here today. We thank Mr. Ted Shaw for being with us today. We're very, very grateful. We're honored to have you on our campus at Morgan. Appreciate your tremendous insight and also the charge that we've been given, which I accept, which I know you accept, which we at the Robert M. Bell Center for Civil Rights and Education are trying to pursue. But as has been made very clear, it's more than a legal strategy. It is an activism strategy. It is a racial justice and social justice strategy that requires all of us to participate with the common goal which I think in a nutshell is to dismantle and uproot white supremacy and replace it with racial justice. And I believe that this convocation has helped us in that cause today. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Thank you, Dr. Barrett. Thank you, Dr. Edwin Johnson, and for all who have helped make this possible. We will invite Ms. Jayla Way to come and lead us in the alma mater, after which we will formally dismiss. Please stand. Thank you all. We're formally dismissed.